Hi and welcome back to our channel, where we recap your favorite games for you. Today we will be recapping Bully, so without further ado, let's begin! Bully is an action-adventure video game developed and published by Rockstar Games. It was released on October 17, 2006 for PlayStation 2 and later remastered for Xbox 360 and PC with Scholarship Edition for the next-gen consoles. The game begins with an introduction of the town in which the plot sets. Bullsworth. Jimmy Hopkins is a resident of the town. Jimmy is an ill-mannered teenager who is not a big fan of his new stepfather. He has an argument with his mother and stepfather, who are driving him to his new school Bullworth Academy, before they leave for their honeymoon for a year. After his parents leave, Jimmy reveals his resentment toward his mother because of her marriage. Miss Danvers approaches him and sends him to the principal, Dr. Crabblesnitch. Dr. Crabblesnitch thinks Jimmy is the nastiest little boy because of his history of doing naughty things, which include vandalism, graffiti, bad language, violent conduct, and disrespecting staff. Jimmy doesn't like the idea of being rehabilitated and decides to challenge it. Miss Danvers sends him off to change, but on his way to his dorm, he gets ambushed by a group of students who are trying to pick on him for being the new kid. Jimmy starts fighting them one by one, but they are interrupted by a prefect. Jimmy proceeds to his dorm and on his way meets another student, Gary Smith, a clever and manipulative boy who he quickly becomes friends with. At his dorm, Jimmy is visited by another student, Pete Kowalski, who has a feminine personality which Gary teases him for. Jimmy and Gary decide to have a tour around the campus. They run into Russell, the strongest of the bullies Jimmy fought against, standing against his locker. Russell intimidates Jimmy into apologizing and giving him all his money. Then they help an awkward girl named Eunice by retrieving her chocolate that a bully took from her, and she thanks Jimmy by kissing him. The duo then visits the cafeteria where Gary introduces him to the different types of cliques at the school. The nerds, who are social outcasts and spend their time at the library. The preps, who are condescending, rich, and brainless. The greasers, who act tough and are found around the auto shop. And the jocks, who rule the school and are not to be messed with. After his first class, a bunch of bullies attack Jimmy for trying to be a teacher's pet after seeing him talking to the principal. Jimmy beats them and gets a slingshot from one of the bullies. When Jimmy meets Gary and Pete back at the dorm, Gary proposes his plan for them to take over the school. He takes them to the football field to knock some jocks out with the slingshot. When he returns to the dorm, Jimmy finds Gary bullying Pete again and asks him to back off. This offends Gary, but he immediately realizes his mistake and apologizes, before proposing a controversial idea to have fun, bullying a helpless homeless man. When they approach the man, they find him intimidating, which makes Gary think that it's not a good idea anymore, so he walks away. The homeless man then threatens to kill Jimmy, but Jimmy impresses him by being courageous during the standoff. The homeless man offers to teach Jimmy military-level fight moves if he finds a transistor for his radio. Jimmy finds the transistor on a rooftop and returns to the homeless man, who fulfills his promise by teaching Jimmy how to uppercut. Jimmy heads to the library where he meets a nerd, Algernon Papadopoulos. Algernon tells Jimmy that everyone is talking about his friendship with the sociopath Gary, before asking him for his help to escort Algernon to his locker to acquire the books he needs to return to the library, in exchange for $5. Jimmy fights off bullies as they head to the locker and Jimmy gets paid for the job. Jimmy returns to Gary and Pete at the dorm where he finds Gary annoying Pete yet again. Gary justifies it by saying he's trying to toughen him up. When Algernon walks in, Algernon asks Jimmy for his help again with saving his friend Bucky from bullies. Gary encourages Jimmy to do it as it would be a nice opportunity to assert dominance over Russell and his boys, which aids his plan to take over the school. Jimmy confesses that he is not interested in taking over the school, but Gary is resilient. Jimmy arrives at the auto shop to find Bucky being attacked by bullies. Jimmy proceeds to fight the bullies off and escort Bucky back. Bucky returns the favor by gifting Jimmy his skateboard. After another class, Jimmy tries to escort Algernon to the library by fighting the bullies, but gets busted by a prefect on his way and gets taken to Dr. Crabblesnitch, who scolds him for his behavior. On his way to his dorm, he gets a job as a security manager for a nerd speech for class president. After doing the job successfully, he gets back to the dorm to find Gary with a new scheme to do pranks on Halloween. When they are done with the pranks, Gary is ready with yet another scheme. Gary takes Jimmy out to beat some bullies. Then they navigate through the basement of the campus to the hole where Gary betrays Jimmy and declares his intention to compete against Jimmy for dominance of the school, before making him fight against Russell. Jimmy defeats Russell and stands up to him against bullying weak kids. Jimmy then continues to exchange favors. He does chores for the cook for cash, helps Mr. Galloway, an alcoholic teacher, hide booze, and receives a camera in exchange from Ms. Phillips, retrieves a nerd's character sheet for money. However, he continues his progress of gaining dominance in school by trying to gain respect from the preps. He helps a prep girl, Pinky, by getting her good movie seats. He later goes out on a date with her to the carnival. He also trains himself to fight from the homeless man and at the gym. He then wins a boxing competition which gets him respect from the preps. The preps include him in a plan to egg Hatrick's house for trying to snitch on Mr. Galloway. When they reach Tad's house, Gary appears and turns the preps against Jimmy by telling them false, distasteful statements that Jimmy made about their families. Jimmy ends up having to fight the preps and escape the scene. Jimmy retaliates by winning a bike race against them, and when they try to steal his trophy, beat them and take it back. He also eggs Tad's house with Russell. During this, his friendship with Pete grows stronger, who later suggests Jimmy to defeat the rich kids by beating them in public by boxing them at the gym. Jimmy challenges the strongest preppy Biff and defeats him in a boxing match. The preps turn out to be sore losers and gang up to beat him. Jimmy beats all of them and properly asserts his dominance. After taking control of the preps, Jimmy decides to go for the greasers next. When Peanut, a greaser, asks Jimmy to help out Johnny Vincent, the paranoid and insecure leader of the greasers, he initially refuses but later agrees to it. Johnny asks Jimmy to spy on his floozy and equally insecure girlfriend Lola, who he thinks is cheating on him with a rich kid named Gord. Jimmy takes pictures of Lola and Gord together and shows them to Johnny, and then beats up Gord and his friends. Jimmy also helps out the cook with organizing her date with the chemistry teacher, Mr. Watts, and stands guard for their date to stop bullies trying to ruin it. After that, he visits the Nerds Clubhouse where he beats Fatty's Consumo high score, which gains him the respect of the nerds and access to their clubhouse. Jimmy also continues learning fight moves from the homeless man. During this time, Jimmy does a few tasks for money, such as helping a comic book seller retrieve his stolen stuff, helping a Santa run a gig by fending off the bullies, then dollicing an opponent Santa's gig and helping him set up his own gig by locating decorative items, and he also delivers some newspapers. Jimmy then meets Beatrice, who appears to be misled into believing that she and Jimmy are a thing. Jimmy denies it but helps her retrieve her diary that a teacher has confiscated. He also gets in trouble with his music teacher, who blackmails him into performing for the Christmas pageant. Jimmy learns that Algernon is under a threat from greasers who want to beat him for trying to make a move on Lola. Jimmy defends Cornelius, a nerd, from the bullies, who tells him where to find Algernon. He rescues him and they escape a pursuit of greasers on their bikes. After that, Jimmy, as the prep's new leader, listens to their complaints about the greasers and decides to send a message by tagging their turf with graffiti. He then invades the greasers' clubhouse, the Blue Balls pool house, and evicts the greasers to take over the clubhouse. Lola makes Johnny and Jimmy compete in a bike race, which Jimmy wins. She then asks Jimmy to retrieve her personal belongings from the abandoned tenements where the greasers hang out, which Jimmy does by fighting his way through. Finally, Jimmy confronts the greasers in an alley and beats the bunch of them, and then eventually beats Johnny at a junkyard. Jimmy's next target is the jocks. As always, Jimmy begins by learning more moves from the homeless man and earning money. He vandalizes Mr. Hatrick's property for bad-mouthing Mr. Galloway to the staff, steals dirty laundry from the girls' dorm for Mr. Burton, and deals drugs for Mr. Watts. Then, Jimmy approaches Algernon to ask for his help, but he refuses. So instead, he bullies the nerds into revealing Ernest's whereabouts. He finds out that Ernest is at the observatory, which is surprisingly fortified by the nerds with the use of tech weapons. He fights his way into the observatory, defeats Ernest, and makes an alliance with the nerds. Jimmy approaches the jocks at the gym, who challenge him in a game of dodgeball. Jimmy wins the game, which grants him access to the jocks' clubhouse. Jimmy finds out that the football team is at the carnival. He reaches there to find out a couple of nerds being bullied. He defeats the jocks using the carnival games and bails out the nerds. Jimmy heads back to the observatory where Ernest asks him to get incriminating pictures of Mandy, a cheerleader, for his plan to defeat the jocks. Jimmy sneaks into the gym bathrooms and takes inappropriate pictures of her and brings them back to the observatory. The jocks find this out and invade the observatory. Jimmy defends it with the help of nerds and their tech weapons. Back at the gym, Jimmy finds Mandy upset. He decides to cover up incriminating pictures of her, which are posted all around the campus. This makes Mandy like Jimmy. Jimmy returns to the observatory where Ernest is ready with his master plan to take revenge on the football team and defeat the jocks. He asks Jimmy to get the mascot costume, which Jimmy does by chasing the mascot off the football field and then beating him in an empty pool. Then he meets the nerds at the field where they replace the football with an explosive one, glue the benches, urinate in the cooler, and change the text on the scoreboard. He then takes on the whole football team on the field, fights his way towards their captain, Ted, and defeats him to finally gain control of all the cliques of the school. Jimmy is now in a position of power as he is ruling the school and having a great time doing it. However, when Pete comes to him with a problem, he is too caught up in his fame to listen. The clique leaders suggest that they pull off a spectacular prank, but Ted's idea of taking a dump on the steps of Town Hall is quickly vetoed. Derby encourages Jimmy to graffiti at Town Hall, and he foolishly goes through with it. When he returns back to the school, chaos has broken loose. All of the cliques have turned against him, and strange things are happening. The library is full of rats, the gym is on fire, and Johnny Vincent has disappeared. It soon becomes clear that the townies are behind these acts, but Jimmy is not able to convince the other students to believe him. He is eventually expelled from the school after Gary, who has become head boy, rats him out for the graffiti on Town Hall. Jimmy Hopkins is on the verge of giving up when Pete encourages him to investigate the townies more thoroughly. He heads to Blue Skies Industrial Park and meets Zoe, a girl who was expelled from Bulworth Academy for complaining about Mr. Burton's advances. Together, they seek revenge on Burton by pushing him down a hill while in a porta-potty. Zoe helps him find the townie leader, Edgar Munson, and with Russell Northrop's help, they break into the townie's hideout to track down Edgar. After defeating Edgar in a battle inside an abandoned chemical plant and earning his respect, Jimmy is now accepted by the townies and welcomed in Blue Skies Industrial Park. Soon after, a full-scale war between the cliques breaks out at Bulworth. Jimmy seeks out Russell while Zoe finds Edgar and the townies. They meet in front of the closed Bulworth gate, and Russell delivers his iconic line, "Russell likes to hurt people for peace," before ramming the gate open with his head. With Russell's help, they hunt down the clique leaders and beat them. Finally, Jimmy confronts Gary and chases him up the partially completed bell tower. Gary taunts and brags about how easily he manipulated everyone into doing what he wanted. When Gary insults Jimmy's mother, he loses control and attacks Gary. They engage in a brawl on the scaffolding, eventually falling through it, and the skylight over Crabblesnitch's office. After overhearing Gary's gloating and finally seeing the truth, Dr. Crabblesnitch sets things right. He reinstates Jimmy and Zoe at Bulworth Academy, expels Gary, fires Mr. Burton, and makes Pete the new head boy. With order and peace restored to the school, Jimmy walks outside to a cheering crowd of students. Zoe runs up to him, and they share a kiss as the credits roll. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, then please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. We will see you in the next one.